please.
You might remember that last week I asked you and the Minister for Justice about what steps you were taking in response to an appalling shooting and murder in my constituency. That dastardly crime, of course, was the latest in a litany of gun murders, which also include tragic victims recently in Swords and Leixlip. And I think Minister Flanagan told me in January that Garda Operation Hybrid had resulted in 86 arrests and the seizure of 91 firearms, including machine guns and assault rifles. Now, I welcome the work of the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau in relation to the investigation of gun crime, but the number of firearms seized in almost 4 years, Taoiseach, seems very low compared to the number of reported crimes, and there's a significant number, of course, of unsolved gun crimes. So are there further actions the Government and Garda Síochána might take to prevent firearms entering this country, perhaps alongside our EU partners, by, for example, targeting the manufacturers of guns in Europe and elsewhere, and the whole issue of traceability? And do we need to greatly strengthen our level of sanctions for importing and using guns with support of Interpol, Europol, and using our extradition powers to apprehend any criminals who are directing crime in this country from outside the jurisdiction? You might remember, Taoiseach, that in 2006, Minister McDowell, former now Senator McDowell, he held a weapons amnesty before implementing the Criminal Justice Act with a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years for illegal possession of guns and up to life imprisonment for possession with intent to endanger life. Now, while shootings and murders have been the most shocking impact on communities, some districts of Dublin Bay North have also suffered greatly from burglaries, car theft and related joyriding, illegal dumping and serious nightly drug-fuelled antisocial and criminal behaviour. There are also regular reports, Taoiseach, of intimidation of households and vandalism of public facilities, including dart stations, which we often hear these reports at the DMR, the Dublin Metropolitan Region North Joint Policing Committee. But a persistent request from our constituents who live in the north fringe of Dublin City and the south fringe of Fingal is for a new Garda station at the centre of this rapidly developing area, which of course is destined to be home for up to 50 or 60,000 people. Now, I have to say I have received comprehensive replies from Minister Flanagan and Commissioner Drew Harris in relation to that provision of a new police station, and the Minister of course informed me that it was the Commissioner's job to allocate resources, guard the boundaries and so on, and Commissioner Harris outlined the actions he's taken and referenced the capital investment programme and the Garda modernisation and renewal programme. But a new district headquarter, we know Taoiseach from Garda sources that a new district headquarters is being planned for DMR North, and surely its location in this burgeoning north-south fringe would be the best location. Now, you'll probably reply, Taoiseach, and refer to the 21,000 Garda personnel, including 15,000 members, promised by 2021. But isn't community policing, which we've discussed before, really the Cinderella service in all of this? And you know, jurisdictions like Sweden, New Zealand and Japan, it's the core, I think, of active policing. And lastly, Taoiseach, why have your government since 2011 left on Garda Síochána well behind other police forces in terms of the most up-to-date IT assets and modern policing technology methods? I mean, we're tired of hearing of deficiencies in Pulse and IT systems and the late delivery, for example, of the handheld devices for our traffic corps.
Thank you, Deputy.
Thanks, Cian.
Thanks very much, Deputy. I should say, Cian Corla, I made an error in my earlier answer. The commitment made at Weston Park in 2001 was, of course, made by Prime Minister Tony Blair, not Prime Minister Cameron. But the position of the government is the same. The United Kingdom government made a commitment in 2001 at Weston Park to carry out a public inquiry under the Inquiries Act into the death of Pat Finucane. The Supreme Court decision today shows that the reviews carried out to date were not compliant with that commitment, and it's our very strong view that that commitment should now be honoured by the British government, and we'll be pressing them to do so. I'm obviously very aware of the incidents that have taken place in recent days, shootings in the M1 retail park in Drogheda, in Corduff, in my own constituency, in Coolock, in the deputies. And government is absolutely working with the Gardaí to improve their resources and capabilities to deal with all forms of crime, but particularly violent crime. It is the case that for many years there was little or no investment in the Gardaí as a consequence of the recession that this country experienced. But over the past 3 years, we have been investing in the Gardaí again. The Garda force has been increased to over 14,000 now, the largest in a very long time. There's increasing civilianisation, freeing up Gardaí to do frontline policing work, and there's real investment now in new Garda stations all around the country, also in IT and in vehicles, and that's going to continue. In terms of where new Garda stations or refurbished Garda stations are located. That, of course, is something that has to be worked on by Garda Síochána, by the OPW, by the Department of Justice. It's dependent on the availability of sites and other operational matters, and I think it's best that it's done in that way. The Gardaí have made some important progress in tackling the insidious threat of organised crime, and there is ongoing contact between the Department of Justice and Garda Síochána to ensure that a successful and proactive approach is taken. The deputies are aware that a number of arrests have been made in the United Kingdom recently on foot of investigations into the supply of drugs and firearms in Ireland and the United Kingdom, which resulted in several court appearances, while others arrested were released under investigation. These investigations were led by the UK National Crime Agency and supported by the Gardaí and UK Police, and I want to acknowledge the cooperation between the two forces and commend those involved in the operation. I also note that the work of Garda Síochána in securing a number of convictions in the Garrett Hutch murder case over the course of the year, and the House will also be aware that Operation Hybrid was established to coordinate the response to violent crime in Dublin and alleviate concerns about community safety, particularly in the inner city, on the north side of the city, where there's significant support from armed support units.
That Taoiseach, I mean, when will the working group report back on alternative responses for personal possession of drugs? I think it was due to report back to the government by the end of 2018, and now we've heard it will be the end of the first quarter before the report is completed. Because at a lot of our joint policing committees and other meetings with Garda Síochána, we hear that virtually all crime is now drug-related, and drugs are present. So, I mean, what consideration is your government therefore given to perhaps looking at decriminalisation on the Portuguese, Uruguayan or Canadian models, or the models that, adopted in many US states? And of course it has to be remembered, Taoiseach, that your government and the previous Fianna Fáil government, you did slash Garda numbers and also retrenched all across health, housing and education. And this has had a desperate impact, of course, obviously, on very vulnerable communities. And the development, of course, of the North Fringe, South Fringe, Dublin City and Fingal, it was held up for almost a decade. It's now proceeding again, but surely an integral part of any plan for a new urban district would be a public security presence. So would you ask the Minister for Justice to liaise with the two planning authorities to ensure that perhaps the new Garda divisional headquarters will be in that new city, if you like, on the northern boundary of our city? Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, I'll certainly ask the Minister for Justice to make contact with the Garda Commissioner about that matter. But I imagine what we should do is allow the Garda Commissioner and the OPW and the Department to work together to find out and establish where the best location and the most practical location is for that new headquarters. I imagine there'll be other people with different views as to where it should be located, and everything will have to be taken into account and into consideration. I'm not sure it's the case. If it is the case that all or most crimes are now drug-related, that certainly wouldn't be the case, for example, when it comes to sexual assaults, when it comes to crimes of that nature or domestic violence. It probably is true in relation to murders and burglaries. A huge number of burglaries are now, and always have been, in fact, drug-related. The work of the group under Judge Garrett Sheehan is still ongoing. We'd expect them to report in the next couple of months, and they're examining whether decriminalisation of possession of small amounts of drugs and narcotics might be the way to go for Ireland. That wouldn't involve legalisation, but it would involve decriminalisation, thereby focusing Garda resources on those who are involved in pushing drugs, selling them, distributing them, rather than those who possess them. So moving away from a criminal justice approach to minor possession towards a healthcare based approach, and that's something that I personally favour, but it needs to be worked through.